Okay, Baruch Hashem, I'm feeling a little better. Thank you. We are starting on this wonderful Motzei Shabbos on the bottom of Nun Gimel Amid Beis. If you by the two dots, 6 lines from the bottom. If you remember, we said that most of the menachos are matzah, but the 10 chalas of the 40 of the Taida and the shtei alechem are chametz. And the question is, how do we make them leaven? So the Gemara tells us, Reb Meir Aimer, Hasa'or boda lohem mitoichan. He removes the sourdough from the loaves themselves, and it is machmitz them. Rather, while Rabbi Yehuda says that he takes dough, mixes it with water, making sourdough, puts it in the isarein, and then fills it up. And they told Rabbi Yehuda even that's a problem, because it's either going to be less or more. So the Gemara says, what does that mean? If he takes dough and he adds water, makes sourdough, puts that in to the isarein, and then fills it up around it with flowers, so then you have an isarein. What's the problem? So Amar Rav Chisda, if isas hasor ova, if the sourdough that he makes is dense, stick, because he mixes in only a little water, so then when he puts it in reality, since it's dense, in reality there's more flour there, and then in reality there's more than an isarein. Nimtzas Yisera midas ha'isarein. It's more than an isarein. On the other hand, raka, if he makes it very loose, so then there's less than an isarein. Nimtzas chasera, then there's really less than an isarein. Says Gemara, but the bottom line is when it fills up the isarein, you have an isarein. Saif ki kakayil, when you're measuring it, the isarein kakayil, you're measuring an isarein. So the Gemara says this is a very subtle difference. Rabba v'Rab Yosef de Imrei Tervayu l'kemoy shehein hoysem misharinan. We evaluate it to the way it was when it was mixed outside. And then the dough was either dense or very thin, and you don't have a full isarein. While says the Gemara, so but there's another eitzah. V'lishkol porsamine, take a little flour from inside, v'lechamtzei me'avroi, and ferment it, and and put it back in and knead it together. Says Gemara, yeah, that would be good, except we're afraid that you might come to take from the outside and not from the inside. Because a leavening agent from outside and not from the contents itself. Now, here's an interesting question. Could you use apples to cause the dough to ferment? Tan Rabbanan, ein machmitzim b'tapuchim. You can't use apples to cause it to ferment. Mishum Rab Chanina ben Gamliel Aimru machmitzin. You could use it to ferment. Rav Kahana Masna Reb Chanina ben Tradian. That it's Reb Chanina ben Tradian that says you could use the apples to ferment. So the Gemara now refers us to halacha by truma. Now we know if truma falls into chulin, it's batal 100 to 1, unless the truma is something that's machbatz, that ferments. If it's something that ferments, then it can't be batal, and it makes the whole chulin truma. So kaman ozo haditnan tapuach sherisku, an apple of truma that was crushed, v'nosnu b'seicha isa, and you put it in a dough of chulin v'chimtza, harizu asura. It is forbidden to a non-kohen. So that means that apple does ferment. So obviously, Kaman, Leimer Rav Chanina ben Gamliel, it's going according to Rav Chanina ben Gamliel, v'loi Rabbanan, because the Rabbanan say that apple doesn't ferment. So the Gemara says no. Afilu Teimer Rabbanan, it could even be going according to Rabbanan. Nehei de chametz gomer loy have, even though it doesn't make it chametz gomer, that it should be good for the shtei alechem and the lachmei taida. Nuksha miya have, it's enough to make it inferior chametz, which is enough that the truma should not be batal. Amar Rav Ilah, ein lo hakosher lekmitza yoisem a minchas chayte. We know that a minchas chayte is chareva, is dry, it has no oil, and when you take the kmitza, you have to have the exact amount. Now, it's easier when it's mixed with oil because it holds together. But by a minchas chayte where there's no oil, so it's granulated, it's hard to get a full amount because it spills out. So Rabbi Yitzchak Abdimi says you could add by a minchas chayte a little water. Rabbi Yitzchak Abdimi, a minchas chayte megabla b'mayim. You could add a little water, uksheira. So the Gemara says, so what's the machlokes? That one says you could add water, one says you can't. So says the Gemara, lema b'ha kamiflagi. The Mar Savar, one holds, k'moy shehein misharinan. We evaluate it the way it is now. And if you've evaluated the way it is now, so okay, it's an isaron. Umar Savar l'k'moy shehoyu misharinan. We evaluate it the way it was. And if we evaluate it according to the way it was, then it has to be an isaron without the addition of the water. Says the Gemara, loy. We could add water to it. But a bahakam iflagi. The Mar Savar my chareva, when it says it has to be dry, it means chareva b'shemen. Or Mar Savar, no, it has to be dry completely. You can't even add water. Chareva mikol davar. So now here we have an interesting. We're going to learn this Gemara, although it's big machlokes. We're going to learn that if something is not a beya, the size of an egg, it can't even be mekabel tumah. There are shittas that hold that if it's a beya, it could be mekabel tumah, but it can't transmit tumah. But we'll learn that if it's not a beya, it can't even be mekabel tumah. Tanan hasam, b'sar ha'egel shenispach. If the meat of a calf became swollen. In other words, originally it was less than a beya, and now it became swollen. Ubesar zikna, or the meat of an old animal, shenismaich. Originally it was a beya, and now it shrunk. Mishtarin l'kemoy shehein. We evaluate it the way it was originally. Now what does that mean? Rav Reb Chiya Reb Yochanan Imrei Mishtarin Kemoy Shehein. It means that we evaluate it the way it is now. So if it's shrunk to less than a beya, it's not mekabel tumah. If it swelled to more than a beya, it is mekabel tumah. While V'Shmuel v'Rebbe Shimon Reish Lakish Imrei Mishtarin K'may Shehein. We measure it as it was originally. So if originally it was a beya, we don't look at its shrinkage, and we say it's Mekabel Tumah. If it was originally less, we don't look at the swelling. So the Gemara says, Meisvei, B'sar ha'egel shaloi ha'yabay kashir, the meat of a calf that didn't have a beya, v'safach v'amad al kashir, and it swelled to a shear, tar l'shavar, if something touched it originally, it's not a kabel tumah. But the tummy mekan laba, but now that it's swollen, it's tummy. So you see that we are mishtarin k'may shehein. Right? This is clearly like Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yochanan. Says the Gemara, that's no raya, because maybe it's only midrabanan, rabbinically, but d'oraisa it's not. Says the Gemara, Ihachi ema seifa. If you're saying that's rabbinical tumah, look at the seifa. V'chein b'pigel, v'chein b'neiser. The same thing is true with pigel and neiser. That if it was small before and swollen now, it's going to be aser as pigel and neiser. So this pigel and neiser is biblical, isn't it? It's a kares. Hainudika pigel v'neiser. Eliyamrit Rabbanan, but if you're talking about Rabbanan, there's no rabbinical pigel v'neiser. Pigel v'neiser but Rabbanan mi'ika. So the Gemara says, yes, there is. But not the isser of eating pigel and neiser. The Rabbanan said that pigel and neiser are metame es hayadayim. This is, neiser is to encourage the Kohanim not to leave anything after its time, and to encourage them not to make pigel. Now, since it's only D'Rabbanan, the Tumas Yadayim, I might think if it's swelled later on, we won't make a D'Rabbanan and a D'Rabbanan. Ema v'chein b'tumas pigel, v'chein b'tumas nois. So kedai t'chamrina, I would have thought, hoyo b'tumas pigel, b'tumas nois is only D'Rabbanani. Kulei hai b'D'Rabbanan, loy avad D'Rabbanan, that they should say that if it's swelled, it would have a tumah d'Rabbanan, kamash malan, that it does. Tajma, Bisar zikna shahoya by kashir, aged meat, meat of an old animal, that was a beya, vitzamak pachas mikashir, and it shrunk. Tamei l'sha'avar, if Tumah touched it when it was original beya, it's Tameh. But now that it shrunk, V'tar Mekan Alaba, so that's pretty clear. That we go K'may Shehein. So Rabbah says, okay, we're going to draw the parameters of the machlokes. We're making it much more straightforward. Amar Rabbah, Kol Echad Demei Kara Ave Bei V'Hashta Les Bei, where it was originally a beya and now it's not. Now it can't be Mekabel Tumah because now it's not. Holes Bei. Now it's not going to be Mekabel Tumah. V'Kol Echad Demei Kara Lo Have Bei, where originally it was less than a beya and now it's swelled, became swollen, V'Hashta Have Bei, that's a Tumah Rabbanan. Everybody agrees with that. Ki Pligi. You know what they argue about? Kigon Shahya by Kashir was the size of a beya, Vitzamak, it shrunk, V'chazar v'tafach, and then it swelled again. Do we say that once it shrunk, it was nitche, and there's not going to be a tumah when it swells again? The Marsava yesh dichui be'isura, there's a rejection by the Isser. Umar Savar Ein Dichui Bi Isura, says the Gemara. Who ever heard of Dichui by Tumah? Umi Ikal Amandi Yama Deyesh Dichui Bi Isurin? That because it shrunk, then when it swelled later on to back to the original size, it's rejected? Vatanan, Kebeya Eichlin, Abeya food, Shanicha Bachama Vinismatu. He left it in the sun and it shrunk to less than a beya. Or Bechen Kazayis Min Ameis, an alv size of a corpse, Kazayis Min Anavela, Ukadoshim in Asheretz, or a lentil size of one of the Shmoyne Shvatim, Uksayis Pigel, Uksayis Noiser, Uksayis Chelev. If he left it in the sun and it shrunk to Hiron, because it's less than a beya, or in the case of a mace, less than a kazayas, in the case of kadasha, less than a lentil, a sheretz. You're not chayav for pigel noiser and chaylev because it's not a kazayas. Then hanichon b'geshamim v'tavchu. If you put it in the rain and it's swelled back, tmeyin, it's tamei. So you see that we don't say dichui because once it shrunk and now it came back to yufta l'mandiyama yesh dichui b'yisurim. It's a refutation of mandiyama that holds that there's rejection by yisurim to yufta. Now, Tajma. Tarmin te'enim ala groigeris b'minyan. You could take off truma from whole figs for dried, shriveled figs by number. So you could, if you have 100, the Gemara assumes they're talking about meiser. So if you have 100 shriveled figs, you could give 10 whole figs. So that we look at its original state. So then the original state of the dried figs were whole figs. So then it fits. You look at it as it is now, then you're taking 10 whole figs for 100 shrunken figs. That's more than a tenth. And that's a problem. Because it's giving too much. You can't give too much. You can't give more than a tenth. Because if you give more than a tenth, only a tenth is meiser. The rest is good, is corrected, but the extra is still tevel. As it says, Tanan amarba b'maisrais, peiroisa mesukanim, the 90 are good, but in maisraisa mekukalim, the more than 10 is messed up because it has still uncorrected tevel in it. Elamai, what are you going to say? Look, that we look at its original state, so that the 90 shrunken were also 90 whole ones originally. Ema Seifa. Groigeris alatainim. If you separate dried figs for whole figs, but you didn't do it by number, you did it by midah, by volume. In other words, you weighed the ta'anim, and you weighed the dried figs, and you gave a tenth of volume. And you go according to the way it is now, shopping. That we look at the dried figs as their whole figs, so then it's going to be a bigger volume. So again, marba b'maisisi, it's giving more than the amount of meiser. Says the Gemara, lahacha b'truma gedayla askinan. We're not talking. It's not talking about a tenth. It's talking about truma gedayla. Truma gedayla, right? We know that there's no fixed share. Even chita achas peiteres esakri, and the midah baininess is trei meya, is 2 out of 100, is a 50th. V'reisha ba'ayin yafa, v'seifa ba'ayin yafa. And the reisha he's giving generously. So he gives a number 10 for 100 of good figs. He's giving generously. And here when he gives the volume of dried figs, he's also giving generously. Says the Gemara, Ihachi Ema Seifa, Amar Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yaisi, Abba HaYonaitel Ese Groigeris Shebemiktaya. He would take 10 dried figs from the cutting instrument for 90 in the basket. Al Tishim Shebekalkala. Now that's not Truma, because Truma you don't give 10 out of 100. The Truma Gedaila, Eser Mayavidite, what's he giving 10 for? Elacha Betrumas Meiser Askinan. Remember, after taking Meiser, the Levi has to give Trumas Meiser to the Kohen. And Trumas Meiser doesn't have to be exact. It's not like Meiser. There's no problem of Marba b'Meisers. The Abba Elazar ben Goimel who? Abba Elazar ben Goimel he. The Tanya Abba Elazar ben Goimel Oima v'nechshab lochem. It should be considered for you Trumaschem. That's 2 Trumas. B'shtei Trumas hakos medaber. Achas Truma Gedayla v'achas Trumas Meiser. And it's Kishem sheTruma Gedayla nitla ba'oimed. Just like Truma Gedayla can be taken by estimation, it doesn't have to be exact, or b'machshava, and it can be done even mentally, even without removing it. Kach Trumas Meiser nitla ba'oimed or b'machshava. And then it's good, because then there's no problem with marba b'meisers. So the Gemara says, Ma Truma b'Gedayla ba'ayin yafa. Just like Truma Gedayla is done generously, af Trumas Meiser ba'ayin yafa. There's no problem with marba b'meisers. However, then the Gemara asks, but umina. Then we have a problem in itself. Amar Rabbi Elazar bar Rabbi Yaisi, Abba HaYonaitel Ese Groigeris Shebemiktaya. He took 10 of the dried out figs, Al Tishim Shebekalkala, for the 90 whole figs. That we view it as it originally was. So then he's giving 10 whole for, the 90 whole. Eliyamrit K'moshe Hain, then he's giving less. B'tzirlahu, because he's giving shriveled ones for whole ones. Says the Gemara, nah, figs are different. Shriveled figs are not considered less than whole figs. Because Ki Asar Abdimi, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Shani Groigeris, dried figs are different. Hoyel v'yochel sholpan. You could cook them heavily, and return them back to their full state. So it's not considered like you're giving less. Okay, let's just pause a moment to start the Daf Beis.